Welcome OPN and all our viewers and supporters. Welcome to the chatters. Also welcome to any streams that are mirroring us tonight. We appreciate your support and your viewership, and we're going to have a really good show tonight, I can tell. Based on the last two evenings, this is going to be a blockbuster. So I'm strapped in, got my goggles on and my cape, and I'm ready to go. So I want to welcome Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zeese, who we've seen independently the last two nights. And together tonight, they're going to talk about their project, that It's Our Economy project. Margaret and Kevin are the co-founders of It's Our Economy. And so we have a wide-ranging set of topics tonight. We're going to get into some strategy and tactics, and also just some background about what it means to be an activist and how we can incorporate that in our daily lives and help lead this revolution forward. So welcome, guys. Thank you for coming back and spending the third evening with us. I think to get started, we'll why don't you give a brief introduction of each of yourselves or each other, and just set a little background, and then we'll launch right into our little questions and see where it takes us.
Great. Okay. So I'm Margaret Flowers. I'm a pediatrician, a single-payer advocate, co-director of It's Our Economy.us, and one of the co-founders or organizers of the occupation of Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C., Occupy Washington, D.C.
I'm the same as her, except I'm a lawyer. I've been doing advocacy work for a long time, since the late 70s, and really got into it in the early 80s. And our current project, It's Our Economy, is a project. Its website's it'soureconomy.us. It seeks to democratize the economy. We think the economy is the critical thing that needs to change, and that government will follow that. And then we see the Occupy as a tactic that we're currently using to get people mobilized. And we have Occupy Washington, D.C. That's the website, occupywashingtondc.org. That's separate from Occupy DC. It's another that does a separate occupation in DC. So we're active on those two fronts primarily, but as Margaret said, she's also very involved in the single payer issue, and I'm also very involved in anti-war issues through a group called Come Home America, which I co-chair, and drug policy through Common Sense for Drug Policy, csdp.org, which deals with a whole range of drug policy issues.
Okay, thank you. And you want to just pause for a moment, because we're seeing that everybody seems to be freezing, and I want to let that shake out. Let me check a couple of things, because we don't want any freezing happening on our show tonight, because there's going to be a lot to cover and it's going to be fast.
I'm not freezing.
You're not freezing? Yeah, yeah.
We're moving.
All right. Well, let's
video though.
Yeah.
Life we're moving.
Maybe a little bit of a lag on live stream, so we'll go ahead and forge ahead, and if the producers will let me know if it looks bad and we need to reestablish the connection, I'll do that. Okay. So I just to think a little bit about what happened the last two nights with Margaret's presentation and our discussion on single-payer health care, and yours last night on a wide range of topics that were tied together, really nicely and helped clarify some things. I had two things that jumped out, and I didn't realize it until I slept on it. One was Margaret's reference to the privatization, the move to privatize social services, for lack of a better term, mostly in healthcare, but that expands throughout. So the privatization of things that had commonly been provided by the government. One thing that I took away from yours last night, Kevin, that I just connected the dots on earlier, was the militarization of the law enforcement agencies. So we're getting squeezed from both ends there, and I think that speaks to the need of why we need to have these discussions, because it's not a one-point attack on the people. It's coming from all directions simultaneously. The final note I want to say on that before we launch into it is, you made the point last night about the Nader model of working on multiple issues at once. So when you run up against one and you're stopped, you can go to the other one, which seems to me to be like the most intelligent and appropriate response based on this multilateral attack on us. You know, our response is multilateral. So
the need to really bring together all these issues in an economic model, and to put forward a model that was consistent with the best ideals of the United States. I think the best ideal that the country prides itself on is the concept of democracy, the people ruling. And that also can be applied to the economy, where the people have more control over the economic lives. If you look at itsourEconomy.us under the issues section, you can see a whole list of different policies that would democratize the economy and give us all more control over our lives. Sometimes that requires worker-owned businesses, so it's not a government entity, but individuals working together to create businesses, or consumers, consumer co-op, or things along those lines. But sometimes it involves government, for example, single-payer health care. One thing about single-payer health care is that it gives people the biggest control of their own lives when it comes to health care. They're not limited to the limited number of doctors that the insurance company approves, or limited number of hospitals the insurance company approves, but instead you have a choice of all doctors in all hospitals. And so it gives you more freedom, gives you more flexibility. It also gives you more freedom, not just in your choice of doctors, but your choice of work. For example, if you are working in a place that provides that you don't like working at, sometimes you stay because you don't want to lose your health care.
Right.
But if your health care goes with you, you can change. Or if you're a young parent and you want to stay home with your kids, losing your health care, if you lose your work, makes it hard for you to do that. So it gives you, so sometimes it's a government program that does it, sometimes it's private industry and our own development of non-government programs that does it, and sometimes it's national and sometimes it's local. So it, it varies. Democratizing the economy varies depending on the topic that we're talking about. You look at our list on the issues page, you'll get a sense of it. And sometimes it's a right-wing idea, sometimes it's perceived as a left-wing idea. For example, the idea of auditing the Federal Reserve came out of Ron Paul, a conservative libertarian Republican. But that's also, I think, part of democratizing the economy, the Federal Reserve being answerable to people rather than being a opaque, secret organization that serves the needs of bankers. Instead, broadening it out so it serves the needs of the entire economy and making it answerable to the people. So put aside right and left, put aside your barriers on government versus non-government, and look at each issue and try to figure out the solution that makes the most sense.
I think, we started the project, It's Our Economy, early in the winter of 2011, I guess, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. But it was an idea that definitely we've been talking about for a while, and you used to have a project called Prosperity Agenda. But you can't have democracy when you have a huge wealth inequality. It just doesn't work that way, because people who have the wealth control the political process. And the economy kind of links all of the issues together. So it's both, it links the issues, but it also is the solution, because if we democratize the economy, we reduce the wealth inequality, then we can have a true democracy. So it just seemed like something that made sense.
Yeah, an example of reducing the wealth inequality is energy. The current format is big tax breaks for oil companies, loan guarantees for nuclear, and funding the pipeline for the tar sands. A democratized approach would, rather than investing in concentrating industry like that, investing in what you see in Germany, for example, where you have people profiting from creating their own energy, from making energy efficient homes and creating energy out of their homes, or communities like in Denmark profiting from wind farms and to the community benefits. And so I think even the energy gets decentralized in a way that provides actually more sustainability, cleaner air, cleaner water, but also spreads the wealth so that we all profit from our homes, our businesses, our parking lots, our cars, whatever we can to create the new energy economy that we need.
That was a very long answer.
No, that was a good answer. And like I said last night, we're not on a timer, so, we want to get into the meat of the thing, so don't feel like you have to rush. And I'll try not to interject too much. I did want to repeat one of the statements from last night, and I hope I'm getting this right and not backwards. But I believe Kevin stated that politics follows economics.
Right.
Which is, an important way of couching the conversation, which makes sense that the focus is on the economics if everything's downstream of that. So that kind of ties it all together. We know you guys are the co-founders, the two of you. I've spent a good bit of time on the site. It is really substantive and in-depth. And I was wondering, how many people do you have working together with you on that? Because it's an enormous amount of work, and I know you guys aren't sitting there working on the website 18 hours a day. So who's, content and all that stuff? Is there?
Well, the way we operate really is we work in coalition with other activists and organizations, and it's almost an osmosis process as a result of that. It just comes to us. I mean, we work on a variety of issues, both of us do, and as a result, we come into contact with people active with groups like Vets for Peace or Public Citizen or Global Trade Issues, Public Banking Institute, Center for Popular, the whole range of groups that we work with, and so I wouldn't call them our staff.
No.
They're our allies,
right.
And the information comes to us that way because we work with all these different people in coalition. That kind of broadens our base.
Right. So we update the website every day.
Yep. So you function like an information clearinghouse for all this material coming in. So there's literally dozens, if not hundreds, of contributors to it and compiling information.
Right.
That's right.
And in some ways, in addition to that, to taking information that other people have produced, we also do produce our own information. So you'll find that on the website as well, and do our own events. The mission statement on the website is that we want to educate, organize, and mobilize people to build a democratized economy. And we've done some mobilization actions, but we've been mostly focused on organization, education, type of stuff. Like we did when the G8 was in Maryland, we held our own Occupy G8 People Summit and brought in people to talk about issues that the G8 would not be addressing, but that they should actually be addressing if they were serious about fixing the global economy. And then we generated a 30-page report based on that with a lot of information and references for people to learn more.
You can also see, that's on the front page of itsourEconomy.us, and you can also see on the front page the Democracy Convention, which was held in Wisconsin was it August, I guess?
August
2 years ago. And that was a convention that dealt with democratizing various aspects from education to military to our economy. We were in charge of the economy section of that, and you can see a whole series of panels that were put together that we organized for that event, democratizing the economy as part of that democracy convention. So we're currently working on Occupy the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and we're going to be putting that up shortly. The TPP if you just put TPP in the search engine on It's Our Economy, you'll see several articles about it. It's a secret negotiation that's been going on that the president has been pushing aggressively this year, and it's a new trade agreement that deals with the Pacific Rim countries. And it really sets a new standard for transnational corporations. People who are afraid of the New World Order should look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's what the New World Order is. It's corporate power.
Right.
It's transnational corporations. And this is being negotiated in secret, but 600 corporate advisors are part of that secret process.
But our own Congress and people can't see what's in the trade agreement. And they sent, when there was a large clamor to reveal what was in this trade agreement, the 600 corporate advisors put out a memorandum of understanding that said we will not release the text until 4 years after the negotiations are completed. And
4 years after it's done, they'll tell us what's in it.
But but some has been leaked, and it's very far-reaching. So it it affects healthcare, it affects internet privacy.
Environment, consumer protection, labor laws. I'll just give you one example of the absurdity of this law, and the corporate nature of it. And it'll become a law when it's approved by the governments. It becomes a treaty. But basically, what it is.
Can I interrupt just a minute, Kevin? Before I lose. No. I want to make sure. So is the TPP like equivalent to this generation's NAFTA? Is it sort of like that?
It's NAFTA on steroids. It has aspects of the WTO in it. It's global trade.
Okay.
And I'll give you one example. I just find, to me, it's absurd. So let's say we want to invest in Vietnam. A U.S. corporation wants to invest in Vietnam. Vietnam has an environmental law that's going to make it more expensive for the corporation to operate. The corporation estimates it's going to lose $100 million over 10 years because of responding to this environmental law. They can then file in the TPP court. They have their own kind of court system, and the judge in the court is a corporate lawyer on leave from his corporate job, and when he's done making that decision, he goes back to his corporate job. And the decision that the corporate what the corporation is seeking is, Vietnam, you have to pay us $100 million over 10 years for those lost profits. Yeah. And the judge is a corporate lawyer.
Yeah, so it basically gives transnational corporations more power than sovereign nations, and it's expected to redefine and reset the terms of globalization. And so this is intended to serve as the trade agreement that all the nations will have to sign on to, and Canada and Mexico are part of it as well.
They want to pull Canada into it. What they're doing now is they're pushing very hard, and they're going to have a meeting in Leesburg, Virginia, and that we're organizing around. And what they're planning, they're pushing very hard right now because they know the labor unions and the environmental groups, which are very much in bed with the Democratic Party, will not criticize Obama before the election. So Obama wants to push forward very aggressively now, get as much in place as he can, and then they want to invite in Canada and say, we've negotiated with us, you can't renegotiate it. When they get Canada and Mexico and the other big countries, and they already have a bunch of other countries, then they'll invite China in and say, you can't renegotiate it all. And so it sets the terms, and they're doing it right now. They're pushing very hard because they want to get as much done before the election, because they know that Obama will not be criticized by environmental groups and labor unions with the election coming up.
And then this is going to be a treaty, so it's not subject to public debate like the normal course of public referendum. It can just all be done internally and imposed upon everybody.
Absolutely.
Yes. So this is really the global trade regimen for the 21st century being put in place, and it's amazing how they're using our manipulated democracy because of the sold out inside the Beltway and big labor union leadership against us, because this will hurt labor around the world. This will hurt the environment around the world. This will hurt consumers, but they're silenced because of our elections are so manipulated.
And I mean, the simple way to look at the TPP would call it a global corporate coup.
Global corporate coup.
Basically what it boils down to. And so next Monday, August 20th, this coming Monday, we will be having a national conference call on interoccupy.net. And if you go to that website, you'll see on the homepage there's a newswire, there's an article about how to register for the call. And we'll talk about what the TPP is, what has been done in other states when they had negotiations in Texas and in California, and some of our plans. We're doing a direct action training in September in Baltimore to prepare for the actions. So if people want to participate in those actions, come down and they can do the direct action training.
Our goal is to put a spotlight on this, to educate people, but also to slow the process down, disrupt it, so they can't get much done before the election.
Right.
You know, I just have to throw this out. Between the two of you, I haven't had a night's sleep this week, and you're ruining tonight's too, because that kind of stuff just makes me crazy, you know, and so I'll be all over it. So, you know, I'm astonished at the lack of highlight that has been, I've heard just little bits and pieces of that, but this comes back to the media issues that we were talking about, the lack of attention or the misdirection. So that's not in the forefront because you don't need to know anything and you know this is not a good idea.
Right.
So I'm clearly going to be all over the map tonight. Just want to jump right into a question about that. How do we combat that? I mean, you touched on the education, the workshops, the direct actions, but literally, how do we rise up against something that huge?
Well, you start by rising up. You start by standing up and saying, no, you can't step on me anymore. When you straighten your back out, it's tougher to step on you. And I think it's important for us that people start to stand up and say, no, we're not going to accept that any longer. And so that's what this action is about. This is not the first action in the United States about it. There were previous rounds of negotiation this year in Houston and San Diego, and people did rise up there. We are getting some help from some unions, by the way, that are bolder than others. And so the people are rising up, and it's growing in momentum. People are getting more awareness, and I think the reason why they do this in secret is because they're insecure about it. If they were secure about what they were doing, confident that it would be supported, they wouldn't be so secretive about it. They wouldn't be having 600 corporate advisors and no citizen advisors. They wouldn't be hiding it from the members of Congress. They wouldn't be stopping discussion and debate about it. In fact, they do the opposite. So this all shows, again, their insecurity. And so I think if we are able to rise up and put a spotlight on it, I think we can stop this thing. I don't think it's unstoppable at all. I think this is very stoppable, and it'll happen if we can just get people alerted and active.
But I think maybe you're asking the broader question of, how are we going to shift power? How are we going to end this corporate rule and shift power to the people? Is that more?
That's a bigger question.
That's a bigger question, but yeah, it's the track I'm on.
Yeah, so that's a question that, of course, we asked ourselves, and it is what led us to create It's Our Economy and also to get involved in the occupation, because what we found, I think I touched on this a little bit the other night, is that in our areas of single issue advocacy, we were all running up against the same obstacle. It's the corporate control of the political process, and it's the corporate media that gives their message out there, spreads a lot of misinformation intentionally to confuse people. And so, and in Washington, a lot of people would do actions. We participated in plenty of actions in DC with arrest scenarios or risk arrest, but none of those had an effect. So really what we came down to in about December of 2010 was we don't want to do anything symbolic anymore. Things are continuing to go down the wrong path. We have to really create something that's going to be effective and stop this and be strategic in our actions. So we started out by, we saw that all the issues, like many people, not just us, that all the issues are connected. And we were meeting with a group of Veterans for Peace and other activists and kind of mulling out this problem, and did a trial run in April of 2011 where we said, can we bring people together that advocate on different issues to do one action, one strategic action? And we got 17 different organizations in New York City to sponsor something called the Sounds of Resistance. We did in Union Square Park. We brought in a band called Junkyard Empire to draw people in. We had Chris Hedges there, and we focused on Bank of America. It was tax day, and Bank of America not only doesn't pay taxes, they get a huge refund. And it was about the time of foreclosures were, really strident as well. So we had people who were being affected by foreclosures speak. We did a short rally, and then hundreds of us marched over to the Bank of America and started picketing it and shut it down. We had 5 of us that agreed to go inside the bank and set up this cardboard town that we created called It's Our Economy Town that had all the things that we wanted the money to be used for. So it had, the recruitment center was closed and turned into a green jobs training center. It had single-payer health care clinics and daycare and public education and
free college,
libraries and free college and things like that. And so this particular bank that we chose was on a corner with these huge plate glass windows.
Which is why we chose it.
With a great location.
It's a nice visual.
So we agreed that 5 of us would go in and set up this town. And as soon as we opened the door and went in, people started streaming in
from the picket line.
From the picket line. So we filled the whole lobby and continued to hold our rally in there. We were singing and we were giving speeches, and the police just didn't know what to do, and people thought it was fantastic.
The police were called immediately. They did nothing. They watched
and they
it.
Smiled.
I mean, it was we initially thought that we didn't want to put people in a position of risking arrest because we didn't go through a training process, so we didn't. Right. We just for everybody else, and so we didn't want to put everyone in a position of risking arrest. And so instead, we just a few of us would go in, and in fact, we were not even sure we'd have 5.
Right.
We were trying to get the last couple at the last minute.
Yeah.
And then when we opened the doors, everybody streamed in, and it was packed, and everybody was willing to risk arrest. And so
they got upset that we left before they got arrested.
People got upset because we left too soon. We kind of got tired in there. We were in there for a couple hours. I mean, it was like, all right, enough. Let's go to the next thing. And so that really gave us a sense that the public was more ready, than we realized. For much more aggressive actions. And around this same time period, of course, the time period of
Madison. We went out to Madison.
Tar Heel Square, Madison, Wisconsin. Spain was getting going. And so a lot was going on that we could see that was being effective. And so a group of us got together after that April 15th event and started to, what can we do that will make sure we are listened to? And we looked at Egypt and Madison and said, occupy.
But a national occupation.
A national occupation in Washington, D.C. And so we started organizing that. And there were people who were telling us we were crazy. The country wasn't ready to occupy public space. No one's going to come out and sleep in a park. That's not going to happen. And the pain threshold wasn't high enough yet. We need more unemployment. We need more social programs cut before people would do that. And so we found people were ready. And as we went through that process...
But we didn't know. I mean, we figured we would organize this one, and if it didn't work, we'd do it again.
Right.
We knew that the people that organized Tar Heel Square had been doing lots of actions over time. These don't just happen.
Right. And there's a lesson right there, the willingness to try again and try again and try again until it takes hold.
Right.
Yeah, not being afraid of failure.
Exactly.
And how you define success. We determined in our own minds the core group is not just Margaret and I, but it grew to a core group of a lot of people. We had
100 people.
100 people nationwide who were really helping to organize this in a non-hierarchical way. So we had weekly conference calls, we had in-person meetings to organize all this, and we found that people were ready for this. And one of the constant debates we had was, when do we leave? What demand do we make in order for us to leave and declare victory? And that was a constant issue brought up on phone, meeting to meeting. We have to make a demand. We have to make a demand. Same kind of issue we saw when Occupy Wall Street happened. The media was saying, "What's your demand? What's your demand?" And so we did a lot of research on that, a lot of talking to people on that. Got a lot of advice on it, and looked at experiences around the world. And when we finally reached the conclusion, and it was kind of one of those light bulbs going off moments, we're not ready to make a demand. This movement's in its infancy. We don't have the power to make a demand. And it was a book on the Albert Einstein Institute, aeinstein.org, which is a website that examines the history of nonviolent movements and how they succeed and what they do to succeed. And one of the books by Robert Helby talked about if you make a demand too soon, it's counterproductive. Because if you, and in multiple ways. First, they can say no, and you look weak and you fail because you can't enforce it. Or they say yes. Let's say your demand is we want clean elections. We want money, we want a clean election. How do we enforce that? We have no power to enforce that. And so making a demand too soon was not the right way to go. And we talked about that with everybody, and I think we all pretty much almost everybody agreed that that was the correct answer after a while. And instead we decided to go for a vision. What is our broad vision that we were working toward? And that vision was ending corporatism and militarism. And that gradually evolved into shifting power from the concentrated wealth, from money to people. It talked about human needs before corporate greed as a slogan. So we had that kind of vision approach. And we continue to work on strategy and how do we achieve that vision And we learned, and now we have a pretty solid idea of how we get there.
So, we spent a lot of time workshopping this and talking about how we were going to achieve this. What we really defined that we were setting out to do is if we want to create change in this country, we need to build an independent movement that's broad-based, a lot of issues working together in solidarity, and that's nonviolent, because strategically nonviolent movements are more successful than violent movements. And if we went into a violent movement immediately, that gives the national security state carte blanche to just crush us. So that's the end of that. So
and this is not just our opinion.
Right.
This is based on 100 years experience with resistance movements. There's a book out called Why Civil Resistance Works, put out by Columbia University Press, and it came out in the last 6 months or 9 months. Why Civil Resistance Works, and it looks at the last 100 years of resistance efforts. And the first thing they do is they compare violent versus nonviolent resistance movements and which ones succeed. And they found that by far nonviolent movements succeed more often. They succeed in achieving their initial goals and putting in a government that continues to support their, work toward their longer-term vision. There are successes in violent movements occasionally. You can think of Castro and Che Guevara. You can think of Mao Zedong. There are resistance movements that succeed, but they are a rarity, and it's understandable. The next thing the book looks at is within nonviolent movements, which ones succeed and which ones fail. What are the ingredients that make success more likely? And what the basic idea is that you want to build from a fringe movement to a mass, as Margaret says, a broad-based, a mass movement. Mass movements are more likely to succeed. And so that's why a vision of a democratized economy where people control the government, not money, that's a mass appeal. That's consistent with American ideology, how we envision our country, from our civics classes, and it is something that covers a lot of ground. And so that broad goal is really important to bring people in. But then you also have to take approaches that bring people in. And so the Helvey book talks about 9 different pillars of power.
Right. I mean, really, so what we found that you need to do is first you have to have this kind of grand vision. This is what the books at the aeinstein.org website tell us. And then underneath that vision, you need to have a strategy that's going to achieve that vision. And then there are a lot of different tactics that are underneath that strategy that serve that strategy. But in terms of determining in terms of our strategy, we saw this as a 2-pronged approach.
Right.
So we called the occupation of Freedom Plaza, Stop the Machine, Create a New World, because we need to protest to expose what's going on that's wrong with our country, and we need to also create the alternative that we want to see to replace the system that we currently have. Underneath that, then there's a broad range of tactics. And what the book talked about was the 9 pillars that hold up a power structure. So those 9 pillars that you have to weaken in order to shift the power of that structure are the police, the military, civil servants, workers, businesses, and youth, media, religious organizations, and non-governmental organizations. And this is all in the books on the alberteinstein.org website, which you can download the books for free. It's great.
And so you see that plays into the concept of building a mass movement, because when you weaken those pillars of power, the idea is to pull people from those pillars to your movement. You want to bring youth to your movement. You want to bring labor to your movement. You want to bring media. You want to bring faith. You want to bring businesses. Yeah. You want to bring military and police. In fact, those two maybe the 2 most important.
Yeah, because if the military and police join you, there's a 60% greater chance of being successful. And by pulling people, you don't have to pull everybody within that pillar to you, but enough that you start to divide that pillar. So Kevin often talks about an example of what happened in New York City, and you probably tell it better.
Which is right. Right. I'm not sure I talked about this last night or not, but At the beginning of the Occupy in Wall Street, after the first week they were there was a protest in Union Square Park, and women, they arrested a bunch of people, and there were some women who were behind an orange mesh fence that the police had put up to hold the arrestees, and Officer Joe Bologna went over there and pepper sprayed them right in their faces. And you could hear, there were about a half dozen cameras, citizen cameras, monitoring it, videotaping it, and you could hear on the cameras a blue-collar cop saying, "Wow, I can't believe he just pepper sprayed her," or pepper sprayed them. And that night on MSNBC, one of the commentators did a commentary on the event, and he talked, Lawrence O'Donnell, whose father happened to be a cop, and he talked about how the police overstepped, that the protesters were exercising the right, they weren't violent, and that the protesters were in the right position. He started to show, you know, the New York police kind of tried to claim that the protesters were violent. Luckily, there were a half dozen different cameras filming it, showing in fact the protesters weren't violent. So the police are made out to be liars, and we were seen as truthful. And so you can see right when that happened at the beginning, the two police are separate. Bologna is pepper spraying. The blue-collar cop is saying, "I can't believe he did that." That night, the media is with us. That brings the public with us. And so we are shifting power. We're pulling the police. We're pulling the media. We're pulling the public. Now, if you had to take a different scenario, if those women behind the orange mesh were saying F the police, or war on pigs, or throwing apples, or throwing batteries, or their shoes at the cops, then that blue-collar cop would have said, "Wow, thank goodness he pepper sprayed her." And Lawrence O'Donnell said, "Well, the police had a right to do that." And you'd have the opposite. You'd have the public supporting the police. You'd have the media supporting the police. You'd have the police joining together in support of each other. And you would have us as a fringe movement.
Right. May I interrupt for just a second? I'm getting a lot of questions. Everybody's on this 9 pillars of power thing. And
okay.
was there a title for that book? I didn't catch it.
Was that in On Strategic Nonviolence?
Yes, that was it. Yeah.
That's the Robert Helvey book.
Robert Helvey book on strategic nonviolence.
Okay.
Conflict.
Robert Helvey. That'll give him something.
HLVEY, on strategic nonviolent conflict, and so
you can download it for free on aeinstein.org.
So basically, you know, what Kevin was talking about a lot last night was acting with intention. So in any of the tactics that
you remember that, right?
Right. Oh yeah, that's burned in my brain. I tweeted it today.
Act with intention, strategically and with intention to shift the power. So whenever you just do anything, you need to be mindful of how you can intentionally draw that pillar towards yourself. So oftentimes when Kevin and I are being interviewed by media, we'll talk to them about, gosh, you know, what is it like at, you know, where you're working right now, and what would it be like if you were
how's it feel to be part of a conglomerate that's coming out of Chicago?
Right.
You know,
telling you what to do.
Telling you what to do. Wouldn't it be great if the writers and the editors owned the paper?
And pretty much everybody has agreed they wish that happened.
Everyone would prefer to be an owner.
Right.
You know, and be able to chart their own course rather than being told by a conglomerate or some big corporation that they have to cover it this way and not cover that story and not report that fact. And so telling the media that the kind of world we're envisioning would make their job better. They could actually be real reporters and, you know, be scrappy covering what the government's doing rather than being told by a conglomerate.
You can write this and you can't write that.
Well,
yeah.
Just one example.
Like, gosh, like today when you were the BBC was going to interview you, they didn't want him to tell the truth. You know, they're like, you can't say that. And he basically said, well, if I can't say that, I'm not doing the interview because that's the truth.
It was about Julian Assange, and I was talking about the memo that WikiLeaks exposed about Hillary Clinton ordering U.S. diplomats to spy on UN diplomats when they came to the United Nations, and she actually got the marching orders from the CIA, and she sent a memo to the diplomats saying, gather information,
get their credit
card numbers, their frequent flyer numbers, you know, find information about them, report on, you know, and so we can have all this information on diplomats. And they didn't want me saying that on BBC for some reason. So the interview didn't happen as a result.
But yeah, but like when we were in Freedom Plaza, each night we would kind of go around the periphery, and there were a lot of police. Initially, they always had, like, they would have like 27 police cars lined up and down the streets at night in case we did something. I don't know what we were going to do. We were just resting peacefully, but deeply, I guess we would say.
You weren't allowed to sleep.
We weren't allowed to sleep.
You weren't allowed to
we
sleep.
just rested deeply.
We were resting deeply, as we told you.
So we would go out and just chat with the police and say, you know, you understand what we're doing here, and we understand that you are, you know, that you've had to cut back on your pensions, accept cutbacks, that you've had to accept a wage freeze in order to maintain your health benefits, that you're working mandatory overtime, that you're struggling, you know, for your family members to go to school or get things they need, and that's why we're here. We're trying to create a better world for all of us. And some of the police said, gosh, we should be up there with you, and some actually did walk through the plaza sometimes and put money in our little donation box. So
you know, when we were arrested for the healthcare issue in front of the Finance Committee with Senator Max Baucus, when we were held in the Capitol Hill jail, one of the cops started telling us about his mother, who had just lost her job, and she was too young for Medicare and couldn't afford the COBRA payments to keep her insurance. And so we immediately were able to talk to him about how what we're advocating would solve his mother's problem. Mm-hmm. And so, not that we expect the police to not do their job, right? But we know it's a long-term process of educating everybody that what we're doing is for the benefit of all of us, and that they are part of the 99%, maybe doing the work of the 1%. But we have to educate them so that when they are forced to do their job, you know, they do it in as best way they can, and maybe at some point when the real crunch comes, they switch sides.
Well, that's what happened in Germany just before the Berlin Wall fell, when Honecker ordered the Stasi to attack the protesters. They refused, and that was the end.
That was the end.
When they refused to turn, you know, violence upon their family members and friends and neighbors, then it was over.
And we saw bits of that in the Occupy. In Albany, very early on, Albany, New York, the police were ordered to take down the Occupy. They refused. That changed later on, and there were not some bad things happened with the police later on. But Occupy changed too, and I think we made some mistakes. In Baltimore, the police union endorsed the Occupy. Yeah. When there were threats from the mayor to close it down, the police union endorsed the Occupy. And there were individual cops all around the country who did good work that way. You know, we saw some ex-military as well, you know, standing with the Occupy and protesting the police. You know, there's some famous scenes in New York of those kinds of situations. So there are more cracks in those pillars than we realize, and we have to be careful not to make mistakes that heal those cracks. We want to break those cracks, those fissures open. We want to expand those fissures. We want to pull those people to our side. And so that's why, you know, some people complain strongly about property damage and violence and seeking conflict with police. We understand the police. You know, I worked in drug policy for 20 years. I know about testifying, which is police testimony in drug cases, testifying, professional testifying. We know about the violence of police SWAT teams in raiding and carrying out drug search warrants. We know about the violence of police, especially in minority communities. We know about the stuff. We were aware of police abuse, so we're not silly about that. But at the same time, responding with more violence is not going to solve the problem. It's going to make it worse because it ends up justifying their violence. The public doesn't want to see store windows broken. The public doesn't want people attacking the police. Now, if we're not saying avoid conflict with the police. You know, we do civil resistance. We get arrested. We
push our limits.
We push our limits. We do things that break the law. Sometimes get arrested. Sometimes don't. We're making our political point. And that's different than going out and doing an F the police rally. That doesn't help.
So here comes. I want to ask a question here along those lines. It's going to take me a minute to get it out. Bear with me. Both of you clearly are extremely well-read, well-informed. You're well-sourced. You're intelligent. You're articulate. You're good organizers and good educators. How is that received out in the larger Occupy community? And why is a lot of that happening, not just with you guys, but with groups all over, and we just don't know about it? And how can we expand that and bring that out into the light? Because I think the education and information is so important, and there does seem to be some degree at times of anti-intellectualism or whatever you want to say. I also believe knowledge is power. You take the knowledge and you act on it. So how do we grow this educational and informational aspect so that we can all learn about TPP, that we all can learn about the history and the context and these books that you reference? I want to know why everybody is not reading the 9 Pillars book, because that's just it's so common sense, and why are we not adopting that methodology wholesale? What's the obstructions to that?
I think that that's something that we are seeing, and I know we want to talk some about the Lewis Powell memo as well, but we're in a phase, this is a long-term effort, and we're in a phase right now really of education, and that's what we're seeing all around the country, is that occupations are engaged in education, whether it's having regular teach-ins. At Occupy Wall Street, they're having a summer university, and they're going to graduate on September 17th at the 1-year anniversary. A lot of, the national gathering in Philly was very focused on workshops as well. So people.
So was Now DC.
And Now DC, we organized in April. We had a 2-week-long social forum there. So, a lot of that is happening. Interoccupy.net is an excellent resource, because if you go on there, you find now they've changed it so they actually have hubs based on various issues, and so you can go to that hub and join those calls and learn more about it. And it's a great way for people to organize across the nation. So a lot of that is happening, but remember, this is all kind of coming out of scratch. We organized our occupation, and we were very focused on teach-ins. We had like 3 sessions each day with 2 or 3 workshops each session in the beginning to do teach-ins. But people are finding ways to do this, and live streaming has been a tremendous tool.
Live streaming is great, but it's not all roundly applauded. But let me say a few things first before I get to that part. Occupy did a lot right. Really did a lot right. The whole General Assembly process, listening to minority views, giving minority views a chance to convince the majority, taking a consensus approach as best we could. All that non-hierarchical approach, that was all really spot-on stuff. Now, there are faults in all of that, too, and we can learn and improve them. But that was really smart stuff. And some of the, declarations that came out of Occupies across the country were really brilliant. So there's a very high IQ in Occupy. There's a high IQ for several reasons. First off, we have the internet, so we can download books from the, A. Einstein. We can read articles. We can read histories. We have there's so much information out there. And also, I think it's right timing. We have a lot of different age groups involved in Occupy. The media like to call it a young movement, and there was a lot of young energy, which was very important. But that was not all the movement. We have people who were involved in the 60s and 70s activism. We have people who were involved in the World Trade Organization, globalization activism in the 90s, the anti-war activism of the Bush administration. And other issues. We have mountaintop removal people, climate change people. There's all sorts of people who are stepping up and getting involved. And so there's a very high IQ. And so that all kind of happened without a formal educational system. It just happened by people coming together and sharing their experiences. And when you start to put on top of that the kind of strategic stuff we're talking about, based on study of resistance movements, based on real experience, it really just brings the IQ up even higher. Now, there is some negative reaction. There's no question that some people, the anti-leader thing, I said on the first day of Occupy, we need to be a movement of many, many leaders. In fact, I told everybody who was at our first occupation, there were several thousand people there the first day, that every one of them is a leader, because when we look back on this 5 years from now, you will have been here when it started. And you are a leader just by being here, and your job is to create more leaders. And so I'm not anti-leadership. I think we need to have accountable leadership. We need to have leadership that responds to the consensus of the group. It's not a hierarchical leadership that dictates to the group, but in fact follows the group and empowers the group to get things done. But there are people who even that kind of leadership offends them. And I can understand it because leaders have been very disappointing, and we have to be very careful about the whole, man or woman on the white horse, syndrome that's going to come save us. We don't want that. We want to have the group leading. We want to have a collective wisdom making it happen. So, now one of the problems in Occupy is that because we are very open, we are the 99% after all, anyone can come in. We start to see a lot of that problem of infiltration. Infiltration not just by law enforcement, but by people who want to take Occupy off track. Where we saw right in our first week, right-wingers infiltrate our Occupy and got us into a pepper spray incident in a drone protest that wouldn't have happened if it had not been for the right-wingers pushing in the wrong direction how we didn't want to go. And so we saw that. We saw the first day of Occupy Wall Street. We saw undercover cops. We were in the back of Zuccotti Park, actually leaving to go back to Baltimore. We saw coming out of an unmarked van, two guys wearing hoods and backpacks and jeans, and the front seat were two cops. So these were undercover cops. They walked right into Zuccotti Park. So there was infiltration right from the beginning. But as Occupy got more successful, it drew more people in, and that included people from the Democratic Party. Democratic Party operatives, union operatives got in to try to direct us into partisan politics, support the Democrats, even though we see the system as corrupt and the Democratic Party is part of that system. And so when you're dealing with a situation of general assemblies where everybody speaks and you try to reach consensus, infiltration is a big problem. So we got attacked. Margaret and I got very personally attacked, especially me. There were all sorts of emails that Kevin doesn't really sleep. He sleeps in the hotel every night. Kevin's stealing money from Occupy Washington, D.C. All sorts of nonsense. And so we started looking into the history of infiltration, and this is the way it is in movements in the United States. Infiltration is a reality. And in fact, the ratio is about 1 to 6. There's 1 out of 6 people involved is likely an infiltrator. And you can look at that from the Democratic National Convention back in 1968. About 10 years later, CBS reported that 1 out of 6 of the protesters were federal agents actively involved in making that havoc. And that doesn't count the Chicago police. You can look at, I know Peter Camejo, who ran for president in 1976. He had a campaign, he's a socialist, he had a campaign, the offices got broken into. He got into court, the FBI into court, and the judge asked the FBI agent in charge, how many agents do you have in the Camejo campaign? The answer was 66.
Including the vice chair.
Including the co-chair of the campaign.
Yeah.
Out of 400, Camejo estimated 400 workers, 66 were FBI agents. And if you look at the history of COINTELPRO and the attacks on the American Indian movement, on the Civil Rights movement, on Martin Luther King, on the Black Panthers, which were real assassinations by the U.S. government. I mean, you look at, infiltration as a reality. And so that raises questions about the consensus process. If 1 out of 6 are infiltrators and you try and reach consensus, the infiltrators can really get you off track. So,
which happened in Occupy LA.
Which happened in a number of Occupies. Occupies are in trouble with drug use. They couldn't get a resolution passed to say no drug use because they couldn't reach consensus.
Yeah.
And so, it happened in lots of the occupations. This is not just our occupation. As we, in fact, started around the country, we heard similar stories as to what we suffered. And one, and other stories, I mean, one of the things you have to be very careful of in Occupy is who controls your social media and your web media. Because there was, in Phoenix, there was a case where they had a very open process. Multiple people had control over their web media, and somebody erased all of their live stream.
All their video.
All their video, and that was going to be used to help defend people in court. It disappeared.
Yeah.
And so you got to be very careful about that kind of stuff. And so you can't be totally open. You have to realize, again, acting with intention. We are in this to shift power to the largest empire in world history, the richest oligarchs in world history. This is a major fight we're undertaking, and we have to be very serious about it. And so we have to approach this with an effort of learning how to succeed. We're not in this to occupy forever. We don't want to sleep in tents in public parks. That's not the goal. That's a tactic. That's a tactic for educating the public about our issue, of educating each other that we're not alone. It's a useful tool for getting attention for our cause. But it's not the end. It's more like a freedom ride, which was a tactic in the overall civil rights struggle. Occupy is a tactic in the overall struggle against concentrated wealth. We have to realize that and look for new tactics, because what happens is, one reason, by the way, that you want to have a mass movement, and you want to have a mass movement that has a diversity to it.
Right.
Because you want to have multiple people with different experiences giving input into decisions, so there's a lot of creativity, so that we're not predictable, so that we're not always going to go out and occupy Zuccotti or Freedom Plaza. We're going to do something different. We're not going to sit on the front of the bus. We're going to sit on lunch counters. We're not going to sit on lunch counters. We're going to do a freedom ride, through segregated South. Different tactics that they have to adapt to. And so having a mass movement with people from diverse backgrounds and multiple leaders working within a strategic framework, a nonviolent movement, that allows for a lot of creativity of tactics.
And solidarity. In that diversity, if you have solidarity, because the way that movements are destroyed is by dividing them. You weaken movements by dividing them. And so by having a very diverse movement, you can't start targeting. You can't, target the women. You can't target the Latinos. You can't. We're all in this together. If you're in solidarity, it makes us much stronger.
If the movement all comes from one community, you can target that community.
Right.
Diversity makes it much harder to target, much harder to predict.
I want to just point to, again, the lessons of history, because you referenced some historical observations about infiltration. And, very often in the movement, people are adopting, the anonymous phrasing, expect us. And I think we could do a lot more if we expect them. I mean, the reactions of the powers that be and the law enforcement people, they're fairly predictable. So, there should be no surprise if we block a crosswalk, or if we occupy a bank, or if we do any one of 100 different things. It's no surprise that we're going to get arrested. Yet, there's a lot of times righteous indignation where I think if we know that historically is going to be the case, we take our action. It gives us a position to make a really bold statement by going in and knowing that's the likely event.
And it gives us an opportunity also, because we know their actions are pretty predictable. And so one of the goals in picking a tactic, the best kind of tactic, is a tactic where it's a win-win for us and a lose-lose for them. In other words, no matter which choice they make, they lose. So with the lunch counter sit-in, if they let the African Americans eat at the lunch counter, we win. If they stop the African Americans with force eating at lunch counter, we win. And so you want to, think through these lose-lose situations for them, and that takes thinking and creativity.
And some of them historically have been very fun. Like, was it Imelda Marcos that they did the turkey, or who was it?
I don't remember which one it was.
I can't remember which dictator couple it was, and they called the wife a turkey, and she loved to have very fancy clothes or something, and so they took some turkeys and they dressed them in fancy clothes and they let them loose. And it was clearly a statement about the dictator's wife, but then the police had to run all around the town trying to catch the turkeys and arrest the turkey.
Then they would have people out, free the turkey. They have signs up, free the turkey, free the turkey.
Yeah. So it was very creative. It's kind of
and they put the police in a situation they didn't want to be in.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be, capturing the dictator's wife's turkey, image, and so it created an opportunity. So I think that kind of creativity, and there's a lot of, another thing you'll see on the A. Einstein website is a list of nonviolent actions. They have a list of 198. There's another website at Swarthmore that has a list of more than 200. There's a lot of variety of tactics in nonviolence. And so when you talk about nonviolence, people think that's a weakness, but it's actually a great strength. There's a lot of versatility in it. And, you can almost call it, Gandhi talked about being militaristic nonviolence. It's an aggressive nonviolence. You are making a challenge, you're creating situations that challenge the powers, that mock the people in power. I mean, humor is very, nonviolence and humor is what John Lennon said are the two things they can't handle. I think that's very true.
And that, you've mentioned this obliquely a couple of times, and I want to speak to it a little bit because it's something that's near and dear to me, is the intersection of art and activism.
Very important.
And the bank occupation you did, there's a huge artistic, creative component in that. It sounds like when you organize events, that's a deliberate, conscious choice to incorporate that. Can you speak to that, like the hows and whys and the psychology of that? Because I suspect, I mean, I have an opinion, of course, but I would like to hear, as organizers, how you perceive that as being valuable.
I guess I mean the simple part is that with art you can say so much and it's not threatening to people. It's something that is admired and respected and creative. We work with someone named Bill Moyer, who's not the Bill Moyer's journalist, who runs.
You work with him too.
Well, yeah, but Bill Moyer's this one. He works. He has something called the Backbone Campaign, and they focus on spectacle art, spectacle action. So they do really big, dramatic things where they may have weather balloons that have a huge banner. They took 2 weather balloons and they hung like a pair of pants from them, so it looked like bottom sticking out, and then it had
someone's rear end.
Right, and then they had a big banner hanging down below that said "Shared Sacrifice My Ass." And they put that up in the air. So that, it was fun. It wasn't threatening, but it gets the message across in a very visual, powerful, dramatic way.
And that's really important because we're dealing with a corporate media that does not want to cover us. And so by making sure we get our message in a visual way, all we may get will be a picture with a caption. And so it's very important to have your messaging visual. It's very important to have T-shirts that make a point, like this "Greed Kills" T-shirt, or we did.
Which everybody's fighting over as you're talking. Everybody's, I want the shirt, right?
We will not be silent.org, and you can order yours.
We will not be silent.org. And it's a great shirt. You get a lot of nice, you get a lot of comments on it. And when we were doing our protest around the Obama health law, we were organized national mobilizations for healthcare, and we had protests at insurance companies across the country, and we made sure that people wore T-shirts that, again, black and white, blue and white. You want to have clear letters, so it's easy when a picture is taken, it can be read. What did I say? It said
Medicare for all.
Medicare for all.
We just didn't want them to take our action at the insurance company and say that we were part of the whole Healthcare for America Now public option thing. Mm-hmm. So we knew that we may not get an article. All we might get is one picture, and in every picture we wanted that people would have their T-shirts on that said Medicare for all. And I think it said patients not profit.
Patients not profit on one side, Medicare for all on the other. And so no matter which way they got photographed when they're being carried out by policemen holding them one arm on each side, you can see their T-shirt saying Medicare for all. And so that you want to make sure your message is visual to take advantage of the media wanting visuals. I mean, newspapers and TV do better with visuals, and so you want to give them visuals. And humor is so key too, as I said. You really want to do your best to make fun of the regime.
Right. And this is, I mean, I love all that, and we're talking about it all the time, but the words and the images matter so much, especially in our culture. The speed at which they can move. So, small graphic phrases that can be photographed like that can get a lot of mileage. So that was a great tip.
And you also have to make sure that you have your own people being the media.
Always have your own.
Always, you cannot count on the corporate media. You got to have your own cameras. You got your own video cameras. You have your own bloggers. You've got to make sure that's part of your planning to include your own media component.
But I wanted to mention there's a film that if people want to see it, you just contact the filmmaker online and they'll allow you to see it for free. It's called Just Do It. And this was she's an American, Emily James, who went to the London Film School, and she embedded herself for a year with climate change activists in the UK. And in addition to documenting what they did, it actually serves as an excellent educational tool for how to do an effective action, because she shows how they organized it, how they did the actions. They were fun.
Shows climate
they were
school.
Clear. Yeah.
Shows their climate school, which is training everyone on how to do the action, how they plan the action step by step.
Yeah.
It's almost an educational program on how to do an action correctly. So it's called Just Do It.
Just Do It, and I think if you go to justdoitfilm.com or something like that, but you contact them, and they're eager for people to see it.
We're compiling a resource page as you guys talk, so we're.
Well, the other one we would recommend for films would be the one that Dennis Traynor Jr. did.
Oh, right.
Dennis was active with organizing our Occupy in Washington, D.C., and then got involved in Occupy all over the country and did an OccuDoc called American Autumn.
Oh, we showed that when it was released on our channel. It was a beautiful film. Beautiful, just outstanding.
OccuDoc.org, you can get it at. .org, right?
I don't remember. It's OccuDoc.something.
I want to get back to your website issues. Do you guys need a break? We've been going for an hour. I'm good. Somebody suggested last week. They said your interviews are so long and I love them, but could we have an intermission? I said I don't know, but I'm willing to go if you guys are. So I want to.
Do we get a check from the chat room?
Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So everybody's good to go. I want to talk just a quick little bit about coalition building. Like, what's your kind of vision? Like when you sit down and you say, okay, we're going to organize an event, and you got the 17 groups to work on the bank, and you did the thing in Wisconsin, and you're doing something all the time. You're putting events together. Just kind of tell us a little bit about how you pull that stuff together. How do you get 17 or 25 disparate groups together?
We have 160 different organizations.
Okay, now you're just showing off.
Over 6 months of organizing, and it was literally for the 6 months that Kevin and I were organizing Freedom Plaza. It was from the moment we woke up in the morning until we went to bed late at night, because we were reaching out to individuals, reaching out to organizations, writing, updating the website, doing media interviews, email blasts each week. It was really very focused organizing, and we had 36 states with, I think we had over 50 state coordinators that we met with weekly by conference calls to, because they were organizing to bring people to Freedom Plaza. And then when the whole Occupy kind of rose up, they wanted to stay home, and so we continued those calls, but more sharing what we were each doing insteed of them coming to DC.
No, there's lots of kind of coalitions.
You just have to reach out.
Yeah, and I think you have various levels of involvement, and if you get too much involvement, it's very hard to create a large coalition, but it might be a more effective one. Right. Some coalitions are just a name on a letterhead, and those are probably the least effective, but they look good. And some of the people involved in ours just were a name on a letterhead. Others, we insist, we really try to push you to promote and bring people and take action. That's what we really want to see people do. One of the most effective coalitions I've ever been involved with was when we organized a drug policy called ARO. ARO stands for Alliance of Reform Organizations. And what that was we formed it in the late 80s, early 90s, I guess it was, maybe early 90s. And the drug policy movement didn't see itself as a movement at that point. And there were lots of different parts to it. There were mandatory sentencing people, forfeiture of property people, medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, harm reduction, needle exchange, foreign policy, Colombian drug war, a whole lot of different people doing their own thing. And we tried to bring them together into a coalition where it was basically an information sharing coalition. Mm-hmm. So you get all these people together on email, maybe meet in person a couple times a year, and you're sharing information. And then out of that network of people and organizations, you get sometimes ad hoc coalitions for a specific project.
Right.
And so, a group, 8 of those groups might come together to work on a medical marijuana initiative, or you might come together to work on a needle exchange legislative effort. And so and those will be short-term ad hoc coalitions that come out of the broader coalition. I found that to be one of the most effective coalitions I've been involved with, and I kind of like that model a lot. There are other models. The Leadership Conference on Civil Rights is a coalition of civil rights groups, and they are much more, close-knit about who can be involved and who can be a spokesperson and those kind of roles. I'm less comfortable with those, but that's worked very well for that coalition, and that was a model we looked at as an option. So, I think you really want to find a broad area of commonality. You want to find a minimal level of action beyond just being on letterhead, and that they're going to do a certain A, B, and C in order to be part of the coalition. And I think
you have to make sure they do A, B, and C. It's a lot of work.
And sometimes, and the impossible thing, of course, is to really mold everybody together into one organization. You can't get to the point where people are sharing email lists. That almost never happens. That's almost impossible to imagine, because the email list is such like a valuable commodity for fundraising and activism that will not be something that you'll be able to share together too easily.
Yeah, so for Occupy Freedom Plaza, Washington, D.C., we just asked people we would generate information and then give it to them and ask them to send it out to their email list. We didn't ask for their email list for ourselves.
Right.
And I did want to just bring up a good object lesson is you did all the prep work and all the front end work for the Occupy Washington, D.C. And then because the movement nationwide got some traction, then a lot of the feeder people that were ostensibly coming towards you decided, oh, we want to stay with our local Occupy. So your project morphed into evolution. And I think Kevin said last night that it was successful in that you did all this work. The vision you had on the front end didn't transpire the way you had envisioned it, but other things equally, if not more valuable, did. And so it wasn't like, oh, you put all this work in and it didn't happen the way you wanted it to. You put all the work in and other stuff happened. So, yeah.
And don't get attached. It's really important. Don't get attached to thinking things are going to be a certain way. It's a constant reevaluation.
When the idea from Adbusters came out to Occupy Wall Street in early July, we announced in June. So we had already been up and running. We had thousands of people involved in our activities already. But when they announced that in July, we had to decide what do we do about that. And it didn't take us very long to decide, but the question is, is that a problem or an opportunity? Is that good or bad? Is that going to help us or hurt us? And we immediately reached the conclusion we are going to support it. We're going to work with it. We're going to be synergistic with it. We're going to build it together. And we had our own Occupy activists from our coalition going to their meetings to help, where they were helping to organize the New York Assembly to make sure they knew about what we were doing. So we were coordinating. We did that the whole way through, and we had, in fact, a cross endorsement. The people who were organizing Occupy Wall Street at that time were U.S. Day of Rage, and we had a cross endorsement. They endorsed us, we endorsed them, and so we immediately saw a synergy there and an opportunity there. And then when our local coordinators wanted to form their own Occupies at home, we said, great, go for it. Having a national. And so I think Occupy accomplished a lot more than we envisioned because it became a national movement that we didn't have control over and didn't seek to have control over, that a lot of people were leading, a lot of people doing great work on, but all kind of working to the same direction without even knowing they were doing it.
Right.
One of my mentors said, you have a movement when things are happening that you didn't organize. And that's what the Occupy movement was, and that's what we want.
Still is. And still
is. Yeah, that's what you want.
Occupy is still doing a lot, and people who think it's not, they should go to our Occupy Washington, D.C. site and sign up. We do a weekly mailing that summarizes key activities around the country and encourages people to get involved in the Occupy TPP. We're also organizing Occupy the Debates, which is around the presidential debates, and we endorsed out of Chicago came Occupy
Obama
everywhere around the presidential campaign. And so, we're trying to let people know about what's going on in the country as well as what we're doing so we can kind of continue the Occupy building. And so go to Occupy Washington, D.C. in the right-hand corner there. You can sign up to receive our weekly updates. It's not just about us, it's about what's happening in the movement.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a good illustration of how you work. You guys and so many other people are working in a spirit of generosity. It's not about what I can get out of it. It's what I can do for it. You know, how can I contribute? And I think that's such a valuable lesson, and you see it all over. And it actually seems to be taking deeper root and getting more traction. So it's, you know, it's very gratifying to be a part of that. I want to touch a little bit on your website, and we're not going to be able to get into it in the depth that I wanted to, but I want to encourage all the viewers and all the chatters to really spend some time on the itsoureconomy.us website, because it is very deep and very involved. There's so much good information, and it will lead you down paths that you haven't thought of before. Great information on actual calls to action and how to do things. So I want to highly recommend that. I want to speak just briefly to it on your header for the people who haven't seen it yet. You have four big issues under the header. I'm going to read them off. It's people before profits, stop foreclosures, break up big finance, and end the wars. So that's kind of like your large statement, but within the site itself, you have 7 primary issues that cover 20 different points. And I actually had hoped to go over all 20 points tonight, but it's not going to happen. But of the 7 primary issues, you know, you have them in order on the site. Do you feel that all of those are equally, have an equal priority? Is this the methodology of attacking, you know, multiple points, multiple problems simultaneously?
Well, I think you're talking about the Occupy Washington, D.C. site.
No, it's Our Economy, and if you look under the Issues tab.
Oh, those issues, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we're trying to do at that page, people don't know what democratize the economy means.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Democratize the economy? Doesn't they, you know, a lot of people never heard of that. And so what we want to try to do at that page is to kind of lay out an overall vision of what a democratized economy would look like, so people can see, you know what they're working toward, and kind of give the whole image, and not just kind of a vague phrase. Mm-hmm. And I think when people look at the overall image of the issues, they see it covers, you know, many aspects of our lives: education, healthcare, energy, you know, governance, infrastructure, local economies, national cover. There's so many different issues that are related to those. But the idea is, though, to give people an overall picture of what we're working toward in a bigger vision.
Okay. And I encourage everybody to read that. It's really articulate and well done, and it's really eye-opening, and there's clarity and definition and vision, and I found it very helpful and informative. I got 1 or 2 little more things. Organizer X, my pal and my partner, and he's a good friend of our channel, and we're actually heading to DNC together to do some work down there. But he specifically tasked me with asking you about lobbyist parties during the conventions. Like, what do you think about the lobbyist parties?
You know, I think that the convention is a way for the 2 parties to get direct corporate donations. It's illegal for a candidate to take a donation from a corporation. It has to go through individuals. And the convention's a way to avoid that. And lobbyist parties are one of the tools they use to do that. It's a way to spend a lot of money to, you know, for alcohol and food, and they probably even bring some women in. I wouldn't be surprised, but I wouldn't accuse them of that. You know, to entertain the politicians, and so I think it's a kind of a giant loophole that needs to be closed.
Okay, and while X is on, because he is in the chat, I just want to give him props and credit for helping to put this together, for putting us in contact. He is truly an organizer. I've enjoyed working with him, and I'm really grateful that he put us up. So Organizer X, thank you so much for helping out OPN and getting that together.
Does X make him anonymous? Is that the idea?
Well, he likes to think he's anonymous, but you know everybody knows and expects him. So, but yeah, he made the calls and the connections. So we really am grateful for that. So if the chatters have any questions, let's get them up pretty quick. And I have a couple on the pad that I'm going to read off, and then we'll do closing comments. Somebody wants to do a check-in on the situation with Assange and the, you know, I guess that's still all up in the air, the asylum in Ecuador, and, you know, what the governmental issues around that are, and what do you think about that?
Well, it's a really dynamic situation that has a lot of unpredictable twists and turns. The whole move to seek asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, which is a little apartment, by the way. That's not a big embassy. It's not going to be not a comfortable place for Assange to be stuck. It's a little apartment in a building, about 5 different rooms. That was a surprise twist, but I think it was a very smart move by Assange. He was reaching the end of his legal option, and this is a legitimate option. Many significant people throughout history have sought political asylum. And Ecuador has a history of accepting political asylum of people in Latin America. And so I think it was a very smart move. I'm very pleased Ecuador made the courageous decision to accept Assange. It puts them at risk with the massive U.S. empire, which the UK and Sweden are part of. Sweden is no longer a neutral country. Sweden is making a lot of money from militarism. All the planes that we used to bomb Libya were made in Sweden. It's a part of the U.S. empire, and a good friend of the U.S. empire. They did rendition of people in Sweden at the behest of the CIA, and played that role. So they're part of the empire. I think the Brits now have a couple of choices. They can let Assange stay there, which would be my choice. If I was in the shoes of leadership there, I don't think picking a battle further will benefit them. I think it will in fact show these empire members for the brutes they are if they do what they threatened to do, which was to assault the Ecuadorian embassy. That would really show them badly under international law. There is a British law that allows them to take away the embassy standing as an embassy. That has not been used. It's only been used once before that people have been able to find. It involved the Cambodian embassy when there were squatters in there. So this is a very different situation. So I'd be surprised if they took that route. They are threatening to take that route. I think a more likely route if they want to attack the embassy is to break diplomatic relations with Ecuador. And if they did that, then the Ecuador diplomats would be told to leave the country. Right. And that would leave Assange in trouble. So there are multiple choices they could take. I'm sure there's some I haven't thought of, but those are the 3 options that I think is the no longer an embassy, leave them alone, or break diplomatic relations. I think my best guess is they'll come to their senses and leave Assange alone, but they may be getting a lot of pressure from the United States to take a different approach. So we'll see.
But I think this is, if I could quickly, this is really interesting coming after the Organization of American States meeting earlier this year where it was really Colombia and the United States against the 28 other nations in that organization, because they wanted, the demand from these other countries was that Cuba should be allowed to be part of the OAS and participate in the next meeting. And the U.S. and Colombia stood together, and the 2 of them were able to block this from being passed. And so the whole...
And the OAS uses the consensus process as well. And you know, Colombia is basically our Israel in Latin America. I mean, it's like Israel's our military base in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Colombia is our military base in Latin America.
But this didn't get talked about in the media. All you heard about were the prostitutes that the Secret Service got caught with. And what people didn't hear was that the entire negotiation broke down. People left in disgust. And so I think it's really interesting to see Ecuador really flexing its muscles
and I think
against the empire.
It's almost like, you know, Ecuador is almost like the Occupy in this case. It's like they are in the process, a lot of Latin American countries are in the process of fighting U.S. empire. U.S. attempted hegemony over the area.
They kicked the U.S. base out.
They clicked the, he earlier kicked a U.S. base out, and he said to the United States, "I'm happy to have a U.S. base if you allow me to have a U.S. base in Florida." I mean,
Ecuadorian base.
Ecuadorian base. God, I blew the punchline.
Oh.
They allowed Ecuador to have a base in Florida, which I thought was a great line.
Yeah, Korea is great.
Korea is doing interesting stuff right now, but it's kind of like what we know in Occupy and in protest and resistance movements. In resistance movements, you want to heighten the conflict. You want to heighten the conflict, and
show who the oppressors are.
And you want to make the other side embarrass themselves by assaulting the embassy or threatening to assault the embassy. You know, and so it's almost an interesting tactic within a strategy of challenging the U.S. empire by accepting Assange and pulling UK into a lose-lose situation. Mm-hmm. Either they allow Assange to stay, which is a lose, or they attack the embassy, which is a lose. And so either way, I think Ecuador has put the U.S. empire in a no-win situation. Now, Bradley Manning is a whole other topic related to that, and I hope people are really watching that closely because it's getting to a very interesting phase of the Bradley Manning case, and people can go to bradleymanning.org and stay on top of that. David Coombs, his lawyer, has just filed a fantastic motion to dismiss based on outrageous government conduct that goes through in details we've never seen before the day-to-day life of solitary confinement for Bradley Manning. Mm-hmm. It's a 105-page filing, very detailed about what occurred, and I think it's, if people want to really see that, it's really what you can find a link on the bradleymanning.org website. It's a very powerful statement, and what the big surprise was that just a few days before it was supposed to be argued, now the argument's been delayed, but just a few days before the original day of the argument, emails were delivered to Coombs as part of discovery that were required to have been given months ago when Coombs asked for them. They finally gave them just a couple of days before the hearing was supposed to happen, and they basically showed that a 3-star general was deciding the solitary confinement conditions, not the person in charge of the brig who's actually seeing what's going on. This was a political decision made at very high levels of the Department of Defense. If a 3-star general is doing that, it's a very political position. They don't act without higher up approval. So I expect if we found emails now with this 3-star, and when he, you know, and what's going to be very interesting down the road in October, you'll probably see Bradley Manning testifying in the hearing, describing his solitary confinement. Mm-hmm. So it's going to get very interesting, and Coombs is urging a motion to dismissal of the case with prejudice for outrageous government conduct, which includes the solitary confinement, which includes the hiding of material information that they're required to provide in discovery, and that's of course related to the Assange case. And so all this is tied together.
And I saw a bit that today that, and I don't know if the quote was from today, but in the last week or so, that Assange even spoke to the Bradley Manning case, that he was being questioned about his situation at the Ecuadorian embassy and all the furor around that. He said, well, that's true, it's bad, but you have to remember here's this other person that's been held for 600 or 800 days, whatever the number was, and that he was pointing to that, knowing those two issues are so entwined. And I thought that was a pretty big statement on his part. We had one more question, and it was, I have to look up because it didn't hit the pad, but the summary of it was, why do you think that President Obama takes so much flack for the domestic situations in the United States when it's the Republican Congress that seems to provide all the roadblocks?
Oh, boy.
I'm just reading the question, okay?
I'll tell you, people are so fooled by the manipulation of these two parties. A two-party corporate duopoly is probably the most stable form of dictatorship, of corporatism you can have, because people are so easily fooled. The parties are different enough. It's like Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They're not spelled the same. 8 out of 10 letters are the same, so they're different. So that when you throw out George Bush and put in Barack Obama, and then you throw out Barack Obama and put in whoever comes next, you think you're making change. And so the same funders are behind both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, President Obama made, and the Democrats made a couple of mistakes very early on. Maybe they're not mistakes, maybe they were intentional. Intentional so they can blame the Republicans, you know, and not, see, the Democrats are a problem. The Democrats are a party that has two bases. One is the money base, and one is the voter base. The voter base, for example, 80% supports single payer. The money base wants subsidies to the insurance industry. They want the investments in health insurance stocks to keep going up. And so the money base wants one thing and the voters want another thing. So the Democrats have to be able to blame somebody else. And so despite the fact that Obama got the bill he wanted, that Rahm Emanuel was in there every day negotiating that bill, he got exactly what he wanted. Many Democrats say, well, he would have gone further if it wasn't for the Republicans. That's nonsense. That's the charade of this fake two-party system, you know, two corporate war parties. And so I think people have to be very careful of allowing that excuse. If the Democrats really wanted to push a progressive agenda, they had the power to do it. Remember, Barack Obama had more than 1 million people on the mall for his inauguration. He had a gigantic database of activists who wanted real change. That's why they supported him. He had the youth across the country energized, wanting real change. And David Plouffe, who was his campaign manager, left that and turned off that database of activists. He didn't use it. And that database of activists could have been used to target blue dog Democrats, to target Republicans in swing districts that could have been you know, pushed to Democrat. They could have used that base as an army to be an activist, progressive president at a time of economic collapse, of 100,000 preventable deaths because of lousy health care, of environmental catastrophe, the climate change. On issue after issue, we are in crisis. And he had an army of activists that he turned off. That was one mistake. The other mistake was they had the power in the Democrat Party. You only needed a 51 vote majority to change the filibuster rule. The filibuster is not in the Constitution. It's just a Senate rule. You don't need a 60-plus vote to end the filibuster. They could have ended the filibuster with 51 votes. If they had done those two things, then we would know they were serious about progressive change. They would have had a majority that was easily winnable on issue after issue. They would have had an army of activists who could have pushed these issues further than the Republicans or the corporatists wanted it to go. But because Obama is a Wall Street Democrat, his biggest contributor were executives from Goldman Sachs. He got through Iowa because of Goldman Sachs contributions. This nonsense about being a grassroots funded campaign is nonsense. That's myth. Yes, he had a lot of grassroots funders, but it was the big funders that made it happen. He's out there now holding $70,000 plus fundraisers at a time when the median income for an individual is $27,000. So he, don't fall for that charade.
I think there's an article that we posted on our Facebook page, Stop the Machine, today by a Professor Unger, and it really clearly outlines why people should not vote for the Democrats or the Republicans. But there's also a book I think that's important.
Yeah.
It's by Lance Selfa. It's S-E-L-F as in Frank A. The book is called The Democrats, A Critical History, and he just did a new edition that includes the Obama presidency. And what he does is it's a very fact-based book that looks at how the beginning of the Democratic Party all the way up to today, and how back in, was it the 80s, or I guess it was the mid-80s when there was a group formed called, what they called the
Democratic Leadership Council.
Yeah, the Democratic Leadership Council, and it was Clinton and Gore, Bruce Babbitt, Richard Gephardt, and they were brought together to more closely reflect the interests of business. They didn't think the DNC was doing a good enough job of representing the businesses, and so they wanted the Democratic Party to be more in line with businesses, and that's what's brought us,
And the DLC was kind of the outgrowth of really what started during the second half of the Carter administration, when the Democratic Party realized they could also raise money from business interests And we have to realize that the business interest attack has been a very planned attack. We wanted to mention tonight the Powell Memo, P-O-W-E-L-L, written by Lewis Powell. People may know his name because he was a Supreme Court Justice appointed by Richard Nixon. He was appointed about 3 months after he wrote the Powell Memo. You can read the Powell Memo on It's Our Economy. Just put in Powell Memo in the search. And It's Our Economy.us. We republished the Powell Memo in August on its anniversary. It was written in 1971, August 1971, when Lewis Powell was a lawyer in Richmond for the tobacco industry and a local representative of the Chamber of Commerce. And he wrote a memo in 1971 to the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, laying out a plan for a corporate takeover, for a corporate coup. He didn't call it that, but that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And you remember, 1971 was a time you had the Weather Underground bombing banks, you had the Black Panthers, you had the women's movement, the environmental movement being aggressive, the civil rights movement, you had the peace movement, a lot of seeming chaos going on. From the perspective of the capitalists, they were losing power, and they were scared. And so Powell's memo came at a critical time. He laid out that. He mentioned Ralph Nader was threatening to jail CEOs. Bill Kunstler was calling for revolution. Universities across the country were in uproar. And it was a plan not just to take over the courts, the Congress, and the presidency, but to take over the media, to take over the universities, the journals, the think tanks, all the liberal institutions that form public opinion and create policy, to take those over with corporate dollars. And this plan has been put in place. And on our OccupyWashingtonDC.org website, we have an article by Bill Moyers. Again, you could look the Powell Memo up there as well. He wrote an article that talked about what happened after the Powell Memo was given to the Chamber of Commerce. Almost immediately, there was a meeting in Washington, D.C., called by the Chamber of Commerce that brought together AT&T, CBS, ABC, General Electric, a half dozen major corporate interests to discuss how we're going to implement the Powell Memo. The Chamber of Commerce doubled in size within a year. We went from
it was like less than 100 lobbyists.
Less than 100 corporate lobbyists in D.C. Now we have 18,000 corporate lobbyists in D.C. Literally, 18,000 corporate lobbyists in D.C. And so this has been a long-term, intentional attack by corporate powers to take control of the government and the institutions that create policy. And so when we start talking about, you could go through the Powell Memo, by the way, and substitute, end corporate power or transform to a people's democracy, and that's our strategy too. It's a good strategy document. But so when we start talking about acting with intention to form a nonviolent, transformative movement that works on two tracks to stop the machine and create a new world, to take the pillars of power, break them apart, bring them to our movement. When we start to act that, intentionally, you shouldn't feel bad about that. That's been done to us. Mm-hmm. That's been done to us.
And it's a long-term effort. It took us a long time to get here, and it may take us a long time. We think this is the rest of our life.
We think this is a generation of work that's ahead of us. And it could happen much quicker than that. We can make some progress. But you want to make sure that when you make progress, don't stop, because it's an ongoing effort. Little victories are not enough. We are talking transformation. We're not talking, a piecemeal small step. We don't just want derivatives regulated. We don't just want
United overturned.
We don't just want mileage on cars increased. We want transformation so that power shifts from wealth to people.
And that's a mistake in the past. In the 1930s, as there was a very strong left movement, and as they started to get concessions and people started to feel a little bit more secure and a little bit better, they thought, oh, we're going in the right direction. We don't have to push anymore.
We're in power.
So we've got to understand that this is a lifetime, constant effort. Even if you start to win changes or see changes happening, you then have to preserve those changes. You have to always be vigilant and make sure that we're staying on the right course. We have European physicians reaching out to us because their systems are under attack, trying to privatize them, and they're constantly having to defend their systems. So once you get there, you're not done. But I know we've probably gone too long.
And that's why one of the main jobs that we have is to create more leaders, because this is not something we carry on forever. We are one of many, and there'll be more coming up later following us to keep this movement going, because this is an ongoing effort, and this is what, you know, active citizenship is about.
And I think that was a beautiful way to wrap it up for tonight. You left us with a great call of action and a great challenge. I want to thank you on behalf of everybody that's watching, and on behalf of me personally. It has been a real privilege and a great education to be able to meet and talk with you guys. It's been a fantastic week, and heartfelt thanks for the work you're doing and the example you set and the inspiration you provide. It is
Well,
really
thanks
wonderful.
for having us on. We appreciate you. We appreciate you being patient and listening.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap this up and call it a night. It's been a great week. Thank you, everybody, for watching and participating.